For the first time, we're learning disturbing details about a second ransom note sent to the family of Nancy Guthrie, the missing mother of Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie. Sources tell CBS News the note, believed to have come from the alleged abductor.
They were already deep in a kidnapping investigation. Evidence at the scene, blood on the porch, a masked man on doorbell camera footage, a ransom demand for millions in Bitcoin. The Guthrie family was bracing for one kind of nightmare. Then a second message arrived, and the words inside it, just a few short lines, turned this case from a desperate rescue mission into something else entirely. She is buried with nature now. That phrase, those 6 words, they landed like a door slamming shut. And the question that followed was immediate, terrifying, and still unanswered. Was someone confessing, or were they lying? You already know the broad strokes of this case. You've followed it since February. You know Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills, a quiet, affluent neighborhood just outside Tucson, Arizona, in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. You know her daughter, Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, stepped away from her career, from her life, from the 2026 Winter Olympics coverage she was set to anchor, to search for her mother. You know blood was found at the scene. You know the doorbell camera caught a masked man with a backpack. You know there was a ransom demand, millions in cryptocurrency, a deadline, a family in agony. But what you may not have fully processed is this. By February 6th, just 5 days after the abduction, someone had already sent a second note, and that note was kept secret by law enforcement and media for nearly 5 months. It wasn't revealed publicly until June 22nd, 2026. That delay alone should tell you something. When investigators ask the media to sit on information, it isn't bureaucratic caution, it's because the information is potentially explosive. And it is. Before we get to what broke everything open, you need to understand what came first. On February 2nd, 2026, just 1 day after Nancy disappeared, a ransom note arrived at local Tucson media outlets. It was an email. It described Nancy Guthrie as safe but scared. It demanded $4 million in Bitcoin. It gave the family a deadline. 2 deadlines, eventually. Neither was met. The note carried details. Investigators, according to reporting from multiple outlets, believed the writer demonstrated specific, first-hand knowledge of the property. That is what separated this note from the noise. And there was a lot of noise. Savannah Guthrie addressed the communication in a public video with her siblings on February 7th. Her words were careful, deliberate, and devastating. "We received your message," she said. "We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." Those words were almost certainly a response to both notes combined, because by the time Savannah said, "We will pay," the second note had already arrived. Here is what we now know, verified across multiple outlets. On February 6th, 2026, 4 days after the first ransom demand, a second email was sent to Tucson television station KOLD. Law enforcement believed it was sent from the same IP address as the first note. That detail matters enormously. It meant investigators had reason to believe this was not a different person trying to exploit the story. Same source, different message, and the message had changed completely. This note did not demand Bitcoin. It did not name a deadline. It did not claim Nancy was alive. According to a source close to the investigation who spoke to News Nation's Brian Enton, corroborated by NBC News citing 3 people familiar with the matter, the second note said Nancy Guthrie had died. Not that she might be in danger. A statement, past tense, gone. And according to the note, it was not intentional. The exact phrase reported by News Nation, "She was buried with nature now." No direct apology, according to the source close to the investigation, though the note expressed something that could be read as regret. The distinction between regret and apology in a document like this is not semantic, it is forensic. It tells investigators how the writer understood their own role in what happened. According to Airmail's reporting, corroborated by CBS News, the second note also raised a disturbing possibility that Nancy's body could be returned for the same $4 million figure from the first note. Think about what that means. The ransom didn't disappear from the equation, it just changed what it was, purchasing. Let's sit with those words. Buried with nature now. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, one of the most careful, credible public voices on this case, described that phrasing to Newsweek in a way that stops you cold. She called it poetic. Soft. She noted that whoever wrote it chose not to say they threw her in the ground or discarded her in the desert. And that distinction is everything. When someone uses language like that in a ransom communication, when they reach for softness, it is not random. Language in these documents is deliberate, or if it isn't deliberate, it is revealing. Either way, investigators read every word. Coffindaffer argued the phrasing showed something deeply unusual for a kidnapper: empathy. You're seeing words that show some sort of empathy, she said. That shows some sort of familiarization. This is someone who either felt something or who was crafting the impression of feeling something. But then she asked the harder question. If this person had empathy, if they understood the weight of what they'd done, why wouldn't they say where she was? Her answer was direct. Because location is evidence. A burial site is a crime scene. If investigators find that location, the trail that leads there also leads back to the person who wrote the note. So the empathy, if it's real, has a ceiling. It goes as far as 6 words, no further. Here is where this case becomes almost impossibly difficult to navigate. By the time the second note arrived, investigators were already drowning in fake communications. Media outlets received dozens of messages in the days and weeks after Nancy's disappearance. People claiming to have information. People claiming to be the kidnappers. Most of it was worthless. Law enforcement said so publicly. The majority were fake. But that noise created a serious problem. Somewhere in that flood of messages were 2 notes that investigators believed were real. And separating signal from noise, while a family waits, while the clock runs, while every hour makes the outcome darker, is exactly the kind of pressure that breaks cases. Then Derek Colella made it worse. Colella, a 42-year-old man from Hawthorne, California, was arrested by the FBI on February 5, 2026. He had allegedly sent 2 text messages to Nancy Guthrie's daughter, Annie, and her husband, Tommaso Cioni, on February 4th. The messages read, "Did you get the Bitcoin? We're waiting on our end for the transaction." He used an app to generate a fake phone number. The FBI traced the account to an IP address linked to his California home. When they confronted him, he admitted it. According to court documents, he said he had been following the case in the media, found the family's contact information online, and wanted to see if they would respond. He is not a suspect in Nancy's disappearance. He had no information, no connection. He was a stranger who watched a family fall apart on national television and decided to reach in. He was charged with transmitting a ransom demand in interstate commerce and using a telecommunications device to threaten or harass. His trial was scheduled for June 23, 2026, one day after the second note became public knowledge. The U.S. Attorney's Office called people like Colella grief profiteers, and they made a clear promise. We will hold this defendant accountable and any other individuals who seek to interfere with federal investigations or profit from the victim family's grief. What the Colella arrest reveals about the real investigation is critical. When a crime this high profile goes public, the signal gets buried in noise almost immediately. Every fake note costs time. Every impersonator burns investigative resources. Every stranger who sends a message thinking they're clever pulls agents away from the communication that actually matters. The FBI was watching every channel, every IP address, every thread, which makes the second note's origin, that same IP address as the first, even harder to dismiss. Savannah Guthrie said it herself in a March 2026 interview. "There are a lot of different notes," she said. "I think most of them, it's my understanding, are not real, and I didn't see them. But I believe the 2 notes that we received, that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real." She didn't explain how she knew. She didn't have to. The family had counsel. The family had seen things the public hadn't. And CNN reported that investigators shared that assessment, that both notes sent to KOLD were believed to be from the actual perpetrator or perpetrators. Same IP address, detailed knowledge of the property, an internal narrative that tracked across 2 separate communications. Investigators don't use the word credible casually, not in a case like this. The family responded to both notes. They said they would pay. They said, in Savannah's words after the second note, "It is never too late to do the right thing." That is the most shattering detail in all of this. Even after a note reportedly told them Nancy was gone, they kept the door open. They kept saying, "Come back." They kept saying, "We will still pay," either because they refused to believe it or because they understood that something could still be recovered, even if Nancy could not. Think about the 2 notes side by side. The first note was functional, a ransom, a number, a deadline, a hostage described as alive. That is structurally a kidnapping for money. The second note abandoned that model entirely. No deadline, a claim of accidental death, language that reads almost like grief, and tucked inside, a suggestion that the body could be purchased. That pivot is not consistent with a professional criminal operation that knew what it was doing from the start. A sophisticated kidnapping ring does not send a follow-up note 5 days later using phrases like, "buried with nature." That is not how career extortionists communicate. What it suggests, to the behavioral analysts and former law enforcement who've spoken about this case, is a kidnapping that went wrong. Maybe catastrophically wrong. Maybe almost immediately. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She required daily medication for a chronic health condition. She had limited mobility. She was taken in the early morning hours. Whatever was planned, whatever these people thought they were doing, what followed may not have resembled any plan at all. And then someone had to decide what to write next. That decision, to send the second note at all, is what makes this behavior so unusual. Coffindaffer made that point precisely. Most kidnappers, when the hostage dies, go silent. There is no strategic benefit to informing the family. There is every reason to disappear. Think about it from a purely strategic standpoint. The money plan had already collapsed. Nancy was gone. No ransom was ever going to be paid for a living person at that point. The rational move, the cold, calculated move, was to vanish. Delete the email account, destroy the device, walk away. No body, no evidence, no trail. That is not what happened. Instead, someone composed a second email from the same account, sent to the same TV station, with words that carried something. Regret, maybe. Explanation, possibly. A strange kind of reaching out that doesn't fit the profile of someone who approached this as a clean transaction. Whether that impulse makes them more dangerous or less, more traceable or less, that's a question investigators are still working through. But someone didn't disappear. Someone went back to the same email, sent it to the same station, used language that was almost gentle. And then Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera and told the world her family would pay for her mother's return. Here is where honesty has to hold the line. The second note's full text has not been officially released by law enforcement. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department declined to comment on its specific contents when asked. Everything the public knows comes from multiple independent outlets citing sources familiar with the investigation. Investigators have not publicly named a suspect in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. As of June 2026, more than 4 months since she vanished, no one has been charged. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. There are also conflicting accounts on certain details of the second note, specifically whether it contained a direct apology and the exact wording of certain passages. Airmail reported one version, NewsNation reported another. NBC News cited 3 sources in a third account. These discrepancies may reflect partial access to the document from different sources, or they may reflect the difficulty of reporting on sealed investigative material. What is not in dispute? The note claimed she was dead, it used the phrase, buried with nature, and law enforcement considered it potentially credible. The 5-month delay in public disclosure is the clearest signal of all. You don't protect information that's gone cold. You protect information that still has somewhere to go. She is buried with nature now. If those words came from the person who took Nancy Guthrie, and investigators had reason to believe both notes came from the same source, then somewhere out there is a location that matches them. A desert, a hillside, a landscape that looks like everywhere and nowhere. And if those words came from someone else, someone who somehow knew what had happened, who had access to details they should not have had, then this investigation has dimensions that haven't been publicly discussed yet. Both are terrifying, for different reasons. The first means Nancy is gone, and whoever is responsible chose poetry over coordinates. The second means there are more threads to this story than anyone has yet pulled. Coffindaffer made a point that keeps returning. A kidnapper who only ever wanted money has no reason to write a second note like this one. No reason to reach back out. No reason to explain. No reason to use soft words about nature and burial. They could just disappear, she said, but they don't. That choice, to write back, to say something, to reach out in some strange way that sits between confession and communication, is a thread. And in cases like this, threads are everything. Savannah Guthrie stood at the Today anchor desk in June, holding a tissue, and said, "We are in agony, and we cannot be at peace. Somebody knows something." She's right. The second note proves it. Whether it was written in confession or in cruelty, whether it was the act of someone overwhelmed by what they'd done, or someone trying to close a door that had blown open, someone knows what those 6 words mean in the literal, geographic, physical sense. And that person has not come forward. As of June 26, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains active and ongoing. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI continue to follow up on leads. The family has offered a $1 million reward for information leading to her recovery. The FBI released a surveillance photo in February showing a person of interest described as a male between 5 feet 9 and 5 feet 10 inches tall, wearing a black Ozark Trail hiker backpack. That person has not been publicly identified. A glove found near Nancy's home contained DNA. Approximately 16 gloves were recovered in the area near her home, most belonging to searchers. But the FBI confirmed at least one appeared to match the gloves worn by the masked suspect seen on doorbell camera footage the morning she was taken. Human remains discovered by a true crime live streamer several miles from the home were examined and determined to be prehistoric, unrelated to this case. A search group also reported finding 25 unmarked graves in Mexico. That lead has not been publicly resolved. The investigation continues, the tips continue, the family continues. Here is the loop this case keeps returning to. If the second note is what investigators believe it is, a legitimate communication from the person or people who abducted Nancy Guthrie, then the most important clue in this case is also the vaguest one. 6 words, no coordinates, no name, nothing that holds up in court, but also an acknowledgement. Someone communicating with the world in their own strange, restrained way about what happened on February 1st, 2026. And if the second note is not legitimate, if it was somehow fabricated by someone with knowledge they shouldn't have had, then the questions this investigation still needs to answer go far deeper than anyone has publicly acknowledged. Either way, the phrase, "buried with nature now," is not background noise. It is the center of this case. It is the thing that turned a rescue into something else. And until Nancy Guthrie is found, until there is a location, a confirmation, a resolution that her family can hold on to, those 6 words will remain exactly what they are. The most important thing investigators have, and not nearly enough. The contents of the ransom notes described in this video are based on reporting from ABC News, NBC News, CNN, and Airmail, all citing sources familiar with the investigation. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed the exact wording of either note. The FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department have declined to comment on the note's specific contents. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No suspect has been charged in connection with her abduction. All information in this video should be understood as reported, not officially confirmed. This case is ongoing. If this video gave you a clearer picture of where this case stands, if you're following this story because you believe it matters, please subscribe. And when this case moves, we will be here